A lot of people have been sending me messages about this, and I figure it's time I give an extensive opinion piece on the Boondocks getting rebooted. The Boondocks is back. The Boondocks is on IMAX. Why are you so caught up in the designs when the show hasn't even aired yet? Why are you so skeptical? Why aren't you like Barack Obama? You got a lovely family. Like, alright, okay, cool. I'll explain some things. Let's roll.
Told the engineer, I said, look, I'm gonna do this one. If he doesn't take this one, fuck it ain't gonna work, man. I tried, you know what I mean? And so when I came in, I went in the booth, I closed the door, and I said, I am the stone that the builder refused. I am the visual, the inspiration that made ladies sing the blues. The spark that makes your idea bright. The same spark that lights the dark, so that you can know
your left from your right.
I am the ballad in your box, the bullet in your gun, the inner glow to let you know to call your brother son. Story that just begun, promising what's to come. I will remain a soldier till the war is won. How could he not take that shit? How could he not? Come on. Happy, come on. Turn me up just a little bit. Turn me up just a little bit, please. Hey,
stone that the builder refused. I am the visual, the inspiration that made ladies sing the blues. I'm the spark that makes your idea bright. The same spark that lights the dark so that you can know your left from your right. I am the ballad in your box, the bullet in the gun, the inner glow that let you know to call your brother son. The story that just begun, the promise of what's to come. And I'ma remain a soldier till the war is won.
What you guys just saw was a preview for A Right to Be Hostile. I'm not sure if I should have shown that, but I mean, I showed it. It's too late now. Before I get into my thoughts on the actual Boondocks reboot, I figured I'd give people a crash course on Boondocks' history with reboots. Before the show, before Universal Press Syndicate picked it up, this was the Boondocks. A series of loosely connected comic strips which told the story of these kids moving into an all-white suburb. The first thing you might notice is the new faces and different art style. Huey, Caesar, Jasmine, Riley, Isis, and Hyra. There was Grits, there was Sydney, there was apparently this guy called John Hazel. There was a bunch of stuff, and that hasn't really returned since. That's kind of my point. The Boondocks get syndicated, and suddenly there's a big revamp. The story is told differently, characters change, and some characters are left behind. Huey goes from being a black nationalist to a radical socialist. Caesar's introduction to the strip is delayed an entire year. Jasmine's introduction actually gets to happen because the Diamondback doesn't write oops, and it's a long story. Also, because of this, Caesar's role is swapped with Riley's. Riley mostly stays the same. Grandad gets a more prominent role, as in the original comic strips, he wasn't even really there. Isis and Hyro, they never return. And instead we're introduced to Tom and Sarah Dubois. Add all these story arcs, like them adjusting to the environment, them going to school, Jasmine's biracial strips, the turn of the millennium, and much more. The syndicated Boondocks strip, outside a very few similarities, was radically different from the original strips. Due to the rebranding, the Boondocks was forced to reinvent its identity, just on the basis that you can't expect everyone to have seen the original strips. To this day, they're really hard to find and recover. I mean, I'll show some examples, but I mean, yeah, to this day, it's really hard. Okay, cool, so we've established that the Boondocks got changed dramatically with a reboot. But before we go into the show's reboot, which I'm sure more people are familiar with, I want to go into the fluidity of the Boondocks' identity as a whole. The strip began as an exploration into the dynamic between black and white people through the lens of innocent children, and how they navigate the world around them. However, this somewhat changes when the strip takes a heavier focus on Bush, politics, and Eddie Murphy movies. I don't get it. And what was once a diverse cast of characters became Huey and Caesar talking on a blank canvas about politics, and that's a lot of the strip. Some people criticize this, saying that it removed a part of what the Boondocks was supposed to be about. Some people miss the old characters like Jasmine and Sydney, but to me, you can kind of look at it both ways. You can look at the old strips from 1999 to mid-2001 without really needing much context of the wider world around them. 2001 and onwards, or at least up until a certain point, you kind of do. You need to understand how patriotic 9/11 made American people. You need to understand that Bush, a man that people commonly regarded as an idiot, was suddenly being praised for capitalizing on the 9/11 craze. You need to understand that the media became a bunch of cheerleaders and unbiased journalism was essentially dead. To an extent, it kind of still is. Now, whether or not that's a bad thing, that's kind of up in the air. One could argue the Boondocks was losing its timeless edge by doing this, while someone else could argue that this era of strips serves as a cultural time capsule for a time period where someone may not remember that well, or weren't even really there for. Regardless of where you stand on that, the point I'm trying to make here is that the Boondocks became radically different from the initial tone and nature of the early years of the syndicated strip. This is no longer about race relations or exploring identity, and it's much more about sticking a foot in the behind of the system. I think there's even a line in The Right to Be Hostile where Aaron says he did it because ultimately I think that's what Huey would want. So is it really anti-Boondocks to do this, or is it just placing a greater emphasis on an element of the series, that being Huey's strong political stance? I'll leave that one up to you, but let's get to the show. The show is where an overwhelming majority of people caught wind of the Boondocks, and a lot of things come to mind when you think of the show, but for the sake of the average fan, I'll try to simplify it to what, I think they think. Niggers, nigger moments, the N-word, black anime fights, Martin Luther King, Booty Warrior. I mean, I'm not saying that's all it is, but that's kind of what people took away from it. Anyone who watches the channel knows I don't think that's all the Boondocks is, but I also don't dislike any of the elements I just mentioned, but however, the show was another instance where the Boondocks story was being rebooted. They told the introduction to Woodcrest in a different way. There's no more Caesar, now we have Ed Wansler, we have his grandkid, Rummy, Ruckus, and all these references to pop culture with satirical undertones of post 9/11 America. While the strip was already loosely going in this direction, the show made it its new identity. The kids were kind of gone, and now it's kind of the grown-up time to shine. This reboot redefined Boondocks once again. It still has references to its origins and influences, what's it called? Public Enemy, The Peanuts, Charlie Brown, hip hop, what have you. But heading into season 2 and onward, it strays further and further away. Once again, the Boondocks' new identity felt like a mixture of new and old ideas, but the new ideas slowly begin to take over to the point where you can look at the show and you can look at the strip and you can see two entirely different things. Not just because of the medium, but also the subjects addressed and how it does it. You can look at season 3 and season 1 and see an entirely different show. You can look at a 2005 strip and look at a 2000 strip and see an entirely different strip. Because the Boondocks is forever evolving, its identity is forever changing and growing with it. And for the most part, this is a good thing. And I'll get into that in a bit. Like, for crying out loud, Huey's a domestic terrorist, so they really went off the deep end, let me not lie. And I don't know, I'm just guessing, but I feel like if you showed this to Aaron in 1997,
what's happening, nigga? Hey, nigga, what the chicken wings and the donuts at?
What the fuck you got to eat in this bitch, nigga?
I don't think he'd say that's part of his vision. Or maybe he would, I don't know. My point is, the vision is forever changing and new ideas keep coming. And most importantly, the world around the Boondocks changes. You could even consider season 4 a soft reboot, but we ain't really gonna get into that. The final Boondocks reboot before this one was the planned video game. Huey's pretty much standard fare. Riley's no longer packing BB guns but a slingshot. Grandad's relatively the same. Sarah looks like she's about the revolution, and maybe she took Huey up on that offer, I don't know. Now the details of the game aren't really that clear, but I'm willing to bet that the idea Aaron had for the video game, he went on to apply to the new show. The tyrannical ruckus, so on and so forth. I mean, it's a hunch, but it seems very likely. That's all I'm trying to say. Okay, so now we're finally up to date. That's cool. The purpose of going through the various Boondocks reboots was to establish that the whole rebooting Boondocks thing, that isn't a new concept. It isn't a new idea. The only difference is that this time it's much bigger. Not a lot of people knew about the Boondocks before syndication. Not a lot of people read the newspaper or knew about the Boondocks comic strip. A lot of people watched the damn show, and it went on to sustain relevance throughout the years, meaning that this is the first global scale Boondocks reboot, and it's why it's such a big deal to some people. And there's a lot of history behind this series. My whole point is, just because this is your first reboot doesn't mean it's the first time Boondocks has done something like this. It's not the first time that Boondocks has gone through such a dramatic change. Nigga was said maybe a few times towards the end of the strip, and a lot of those strips were banned, so and really the main reason they did that was because the show was going, and it's like when they introduced Ruckus, it was really just to make the strip more like the show. But again, nigga was mainly uncharted territory for the Boondocks, and that was such a big change for the show that to some people, the use of the word alone, they may be a minority, but there's a significant number of people, they mess with the strip, but they don't mess with the show. And I'm not even just talking season 2 and onward, no, this is even season 1. Like, there's some people that really they love the Boondocks strip, but second it comes to the show, they ain't feeling it. Like, there is an audience for that. Honestly and truly, some days I really do feel like that. Sometimes I feel like they should go back to what they were doing in the comic strip, early on in 1999 and year 2000. But then I have to check my hypocrisy with that. Obviously that needs to be looked at in context. It's hypocritical for me to go, oh, the Boondocks adaptation isn't completely faithful, and knocking that as a flaw, fully knowing that the Boondocks show wasn't completely faithful. The strip itself wasn't completely faithful. Things change, and it's very likely that the things that brought us into the Boondocks, the majority of us being the show, were things that weren't faithful to the original source material. So where do you draw the line? And that's why I think it's really ridiculous to get caught up in this whole purist mindset. It's inherently contradictory because it never ends. So this is being added in post. I went into a few things I'm looking back on. I'm like, nobody needs to hear that. Watch the right to be hostile when it comes out. How about that? Alright, cool. It's hard to be judgmental when there's so little to base everything off. A synopsis and a few designs, and some of which I actually like, so there's that. The purpose of this video isn't to explain why I have a right to be skeptical. It's to prepare people's minds for something different. It won't be the same. This isn't season 5. This is a whole new thing. And it's probably going to be 3D, but maybe I'm just reaching. I don't know. I don't know who's going to animate all this, so I'm just saying. I think just as the Boondocks has done away with so much before, people have a right to be fearful that the thing they like most about the Boondocks will be left behind. But despite the changes, as long as it's equally as sincere and Aaron is behind it, then regardless of our preference, it will be Boondocks. And I think just as the original show sustained relevance throughout the years, the reboot's probably going to accomplish very similar things in years to come. The Boondocks is back. Let's hope it's good.
Don't know the deal.